You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome into the Toronto Sports Rush channel, part of the Bet Rivers Network. EJ Hradek here alongside, and you say this a lot, like you say the one and only, but I think this is the one and only Brian Burke. Burkey, thanks so much for taking the time today to chat with me. And, I wanted to start by asking you this. I mean, I'm looking through your career, and seemingly you have done everything there is to do in hockey. You were a player, you're a manager, you work with the league, you work with different teams. You're working with the Women's Professional League. You've done almost. Is there anything in your mind that you didn't do?
Well, I never coached, and I thought I would be a coach. Lou Lamoriello talked me into taking the LSATs. That's how I got to law school and get into management. But my plan originally was to coach, get my master's in history, and go back and coach and teach college.
Were you ever close at any point in your career? Like, you were a manager. A lot of times we see managers, when they fire a coach, they go downstairs. Were you ever close?
No. Guys that have done that have been coaches. Like Lou Lamoriello, he was a coach for a long time at Providence College. Yeah. He had actually coached for years and years. Those guys are qualified to take over a bench. I never was.
I don't know. I would have loved to see you behind the bench. I mean, when you think about it, do you think about what kind of coach you would have been? You could have been a tough guy when you wore the tie like that behind the bench. I mean, what were in fantasy land? Where was Brian Burke behind the bench?
I would have liked to be a coach. I never thought I'd get a chance to play pro hockey. So I thought I would get my master's in history. I was a history major. I had registered for the GREs to get my master's in history and coach college and teach. That's what I thought I would do. That was my plan.
Yeah.
I wanted to be, Lou Lamoriello was a great coach. He was my coach for 4 years. I wanted to be like Lou, only a little more reasonable.
How was Lou as a coach back then at Providence?
Well, a lot of people think he's old school, and he is. But he's very progressive, too. He was very ahead of his time on many, 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 many ways. So he was perfect for me. He liked physical teams. You get rough, he give you a tap on the shoulder, get out there and make something happen. And I like that. So we had star players. Ronnie Wilson was our star. He was the best player in college hockey, maybe ever. And we had good players, and we had good systems, and we worked hard.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, that sounds like a Lou Lamoriello type team. We just had the trade deadline came and went. You managed several teams in the National Hockey League. You were involved as a president of hockey operations for several other teams. When I say the trade deadline to you, what are the first things that come to your mind?
Mistakes. Like, you look at you make more mistakes at the trade deadline on July 1st than the rest of the year, all those other days combined. You're going to see, like, you look at the loading up that took place here. EJ, I checked with the league. They're only awarding one Stanley Cup this year.
Yeah.
I checked again.
Only one.
Only one. So you're going to see some real good teams go out in the first or second round, and all those draft picks and all those players that were acquired are going to disappear on you. And you can't recover from those losses. But you have to do it. I get it. I'm not being critical. But mistakes. And then that would be the one word. Second word would be excitement. What a great trade deadline. More people excited about this than ever, maybe.
It seemed like there was a lot of attention this year. It was a crazy year with the Rantanen situation, which rarely happens. I'll ask you, because you've been around a while. I can't think of a star player that was traded twice in season in the same year. Has anybody come to mind for you?
No, there's a good reason for that. I think it was a colossal mistake by Carolina to make that first trade without doing some homework. Yeah. Finding out. Now, they made a nice recovery. I think the recovery to trade him back out was good. Stan Coleman and 2 firsts. So they made a nice recovery, but they didn't get anything like what they paid to get the player. It was a mistake.
Now, like, when you talk about that, right, is that just simply that you have to have the guy's signature on a contract to make that move?
No, I don't think a signature. I think you have to have some preliminary discussion and say, look, how serious are you about coming to Carolina? Carolina is a great place to live. It's a great city, great fans, wonderful place to live. If you like a suburban, rural type setting, it's like Columbus, a great city to live in, great place to live. And players love it there. it's not for everybody. So before you trade a player there or acquire that player, you better have that conversation with a star player. Is this somewhere you'd like to stay? Can we have some preliminary talks with your agent?
Do you think, Berkey, that like from the Colorado standpoint at the start of this, because we hear a lot of reporting on what went on, and you've been the guy that's had to make those decisions. You've been the guy that's had to go into that room and make those calls. Like it seemed like Colorado was trying to get ahead of a potential problem early, which is unusual. A lot of times with the star player, you'll just wait it out, and like they've done with other guys. I mean, Gabriel Landeskog, I remember he went right down to, I think it was June 30th, or right down to the final day. Like, do you think that the way it went down kind of surprised Rantanen so much and put Carolina, in a spot where they wanted to do something? They wanted to take a shot, so they were willing to take a bigger risk just because everything happened when it did.
Well, I heard Rantanen was surprised by the failure, Colorado's failure to move on it. They thought, okay, we'll get the deal done. And Colorado said, no, we won't. And they made a hell of a deal, I think. I like what they got back on their end of the deal. I said that at the time. It's easy now to say, I like that deal a month later. I like that deal, and I said so right away. Yeah. I love both players they got. So I thought it was they had enough and said, fine, I think you're going to see more and more of that. I really do.
Mm-hmm. You have to be like Berkey. I would say again, because you've been in that spot. Like if you're Chris McFarland and Joe Sakic and those guys, I mean, I know it. People said it was bold for Carolina. It's bold for Dallas. I think it's bold for Colorado to make a move like that. You're right. I agree with you. I think getting Natchez back and getting Drury back, they were helpful players. They fit for you salary cap wise. But I think it's pretty bold to trade Mikko Rantanen in January.
Yeah, not popular too. You talk about bold.
No.
Your owner better be on board, and your GM better be on board, or your team president like Joe Sakic better be on board, because it's not popular. You're trading away a guy who's a Stanley Cup winner, a great player, a great kid, loves Colorado, but it's like Brad Marchand. You're going to see more and more of that, I believe, and Stamkos. You're going to see more and more of that where players say, no, we're not doing 7-year deals for guys who are 34 or 35 years old. We're not. I think you're going to see that more and more.
Let me ask you. Let's shift over to the Toronto Maple Leafs situation. You were in that chair as the general manager of the Toronto Maple Leafs for several seasons. You had a lot of different things to kind of deal with over your time there. What did you think of how things played out for the Leafs and with Brad Treliving, who you know pretty well from Calgary? How do you think things played out in Toronto with making the acquisitions, getting Lawton, and then getting the help on defense?
Well, I like all the help they got. I like the players they got. Their goaltending, which stumbled a little bit, appears to be back on track after last night. I like Carlo a lot. He's a really good player. I like Scott Lawton. I think it's just what they needed. The question is, you look at what Florida did and what Tampa's done, was it enough? And if they don't finish in first place, and they get eliminated in the first round, people are going to say more of the same. I like everything Tree did. I'm not puzzled a little bit about why they talked to Marner, but I think I understand why.
Yeah. That's a tricky one for me because, and again, you've been in that situation, Berkey, so I'll ask you. I mean, I guess there was the idea when Rantanen was on the move again from Carolina, everybody's doing their due diligence, checking in. He's a free agent. He's a hell of a player. Toronto Maple Leafs inquired, and the conversation became that if Carolina, they would trade him, but they would want Marner back, and then Toronto had to make the ask to Marner, which I think creates kind of a firestorm around the Toronto Maple Leafs a little bit in a place. Again, you've been the manager there. You know how that works. Did they have to go to Marner in that situation and ask him? How does that work?
In my view, yes. In my view, at that moment, when Carolina says, we'd like to talk to you about Mitch Marner, they owe that to the player to give him that option and say, okay, we're the Toronto Maple Leafs. We don't want to trade you. We haven't asked you to waive. But in this case, for the player, they've asked us, so we feel we have to ask you. And I think your owner would say, you better make that call. You would better make that call and give him that opportunity. If he comes out later and says, I would have gone there in a heartbeat, you missed an opportunity. So I don't think Tree had a choice. But I don't think it's going to poison this negotiation. It might make it a little more strained, a little more difficult. But I think everyone wants to get this deal done, and it will get done. So I think Tree did what he had to do. I think some ruffled feathers a little bit, but I think they're all professionals. They want to get the deal done, they'll get it done. Might cost a little more money.
Yeah, well, listen, you know how that goes. Seems like money always goes up with every passing day, especially when a player is playing well and Marner's playing well. The cap is going to be going up. You've watched Marner for a long time now. I mean, where do you think it's going? I mean, you think it does get done? It seems like to me eventually it gets done, but it is going to be expensive.
It's going to get done, and it's going to be expensive, is my prediction. I think Mitch I don't know Mitch well. I've said hi to him a few times.
Yeah.
But I think he loves Toronto. I think his wife is from Toronto. I think they're both happy there. They're expecting a kid. So I think they're going to stay, but it's going to cost money. I think he's a marvelous player. People don't see him enough. This guy's a very complete hockey player. He kills penalties. He's elite penalty killer. He's a 100-point guy. He's a great kid, good player. Everything about him I like it. He's a Toronto area, Ontario kid. But the question is, the report card for Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews is going to come in May.
Yeah,
it's never going to be in April, and until they shed that failure to advance thing, it's going to continue.
The Rantanen signs for 8 times 12. Now he signs that contract in Dallas, no tax state, so the money goes further there. How much does that impact the Marner negotiation in your mind?
Well, I think the cap's going up, and there's no question about it that's a great contract for Mikko Rantanen in Dallas. So they have no state tax.
Because there's a winger, right? They're wingers. They're both wingers. So do you view them in like kind of an apples to apples comparison in that regard?
Well, I'm pretty sure you have to. I mean, if you go into if you go in as an agent, and I was in the agent business, you can't go in and say, I know my guy's a winger, and I know centers get paid more, but he's got to get paid more. That doesn't work very often. And that's a good recipe for walking away from a deal. So to me, winger is not the same as a center, top center. But there's a number there that works for everyone that takes care of the tax discrepancy, and it's not a 12.
Yeah. Do you think it gets as high as 13 because of that? When you're doing the calculations, does it need to get to 13? Could it be 12.5?
I think it needs to get to 13, and I'm surprised it hasn't already.
Wow. Because that's a big number. I mean, the tax thing plays into it. You've been in management a long time. You work with the league. You work with players. So when is that something the league has to address in your mind at some point, or is that just kind of part of the landscape of the league that certain places have that advantage of the no state tax and they can act accordingly?
I'd like to keep an eye on it. I've looked into ways to equalize it and make it after tax money. But with the tariffs and stuff right now, what would that do right now in Canada?
Yeah.
It'd say 15% tariff. We're going to change the rates on what the players get paid. I mean, it's very problematic. There's smarter people than I could probably do it, but I can't. I can't figure out a way. So for now, we're stuck with it. At some point, as the cap grows, the discrepancy will grow so large that leagues will have to look at this.
Okay. Let me ask you about the Leafs because they did get the win last night over the Utah Hockey Club. And, Berkey, you lived it there in Toronto. So, I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. But I find this year I've been focused more on the Leafs, doing stuff here, working with the Bet Rivers Network and keeping an eye on the Leafs. And it just seems like, boy, oh boy, there is a lot of distractions. It's maybe just a conversation. And it's distractions really that go on around the team. I don't know. In the room is different. But how much different did you find it? And you also were, involved in teams in Vancouver and Calgary. But is Toronto such a unique market in your mind?
Yes, it is. It's the Vatican. It's the biggest source of noise and attention and focus. I mean, I bumped into people last night. I was out, and I was at the LNHL, a Little Native Hockey League, Aboriginal tournament. It was fantastic, but it was bumping into people. They all want to know about the Leafs moves. No one asked me about Vancouver or Montreal. I said, what do you think of the Leafs moves? What do you think of the Leafs moves? And I loved working in Toronto. I didn't get the job done there, which is unfortunate, but I loved working there. And it's a great place to work. You have to tune out a lot of the white noise. I mean, a lot. Yeah. You have to turn the filter up about 70%. You have to tune out about 70%. Vancouver was different. When I worked there, social media wasn't that bad. After I left Vancouver, social media got terrible. So Vancouver's a close second in terms of what you have to ignore.
How about that? How about social media now and all these different things now? I mean, how has it changed the game in your mind for the players in terms of trying to keep noise out? It's almost impossible to do it. Everybody has a phone. It just seems like, it leaks right into your life, whether you like it or not.
Well, I don't know if you remember from my book, EJ, but I sued the media over some unsubstantiated allegations about my personal life,
Yeah.
and got successful result. Got retractions against a bunch of the people involved. Changed the law in Canada. So I would encourage people, if it gets bad enough, if they say something that's completely untrue, sue the bastards. There is a way to deal with this stuff. But in the meantime, just ignore it. Until they get really vicious and you feel you have to do something, just ignore it.
What do you think about the Leafs this year? I mean, they have it's been kind of like it's been a really good season, and they're in this crazy division now. And you mentioned earlier, Florida and Tampa. They have, it's been an arms race. They've added some really good pieces there. Those are really good teams. The Leafs have been a good team this year. Where do you think the Leafs are right now as we come down the stretch and get ready for the start of the playoffs?
Well, I think they got a real good team. They're top heavy. They have been forever. So it looks like Tree was trying to make them more balanced and a little bigger. I think he's done that. I like the ads on defense. Canada comes back pretty quick. So I like their team a lot. The question's going to be, and the question would be with Florida, have you done too much? Have they added too much too soon?
Yeah.
Too late in the season? Same with Tampa. Are they trying to make adjustments right before the deadline, which doesn't usually work? So it makes for fascinating television and talk radio. It makes for the games are going to be fantastic. But I think Toronto's got a good shot. I like their team.
The Leafs, they had several of the guys obviously played in the Four Nations tournament. What did you think of that? You've been involved in international hockey for years. You helped Team USA. I guess you've been involved with USA Hockey for a long time. I think 2010 you were in the management group there. You guys won the silver. It was a great run to the final, losing in overtime to Canada. What did you think of the Four Nations?
Well, I worked on 12 national teams, two Olympic teams.
Wow.
2 Olympic teams and 9 world championships and 8 world championships and 1 World Cup. So it adds up to 12. JJ, the late great Jimmy Johansson, and I were talking about it on a plane one time. Mm-hmm. He was adding them up for me. So he said it's 12. And so I go back a long way. Just means I'm getting old. But my first one was 03. I worked on the Team USA that's a GM at Hartford. We were in Germany that year. So I thought the Four Nations was fantastic for a contrived tournament, a jury-rigged tournament kind of put together with baling wire and chewing gum. And, okay, we'll pick 4 teams. And I thought it was fantastic. I thought the hockey was great. And not just Canada, U.S. The Finns were hard luck in the tournament.
Yeah,
Swedes,
a lot of injuries.
But all 4 of those teams were terrific.
When that Saturday night game in Montreal, I mean, you had to love that game. I mean, you've talked about having like you talked about it in college there, physical brand of hockey. You've always, you wanted truculent teams, you used to say. I mean, the start of that game was kind of off the wall.
Yeah, it was great. And I don't want to see that all games start off with fights, but we've had 4 of them since right out the opening face-off. Matthew Nyes, Kotkaniemi the other day. So I love it. I don't want to see it every day, but I thought it was great. And it turns out it was premeditated and pre-planned. I had a group chat, but it doesn't make it any less interesting. And to put the emotion back in, I've been saying this for years, EJ, you know that. There's a place for fighting, and I hope it never goes away completely. I don't want to go back to 3-hour games and not a dinosaur, but some more fighting than we have would be admirable to me and preferable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes, for me, the fights that occur out of the passion of the game when 2 guys are really hard competing, to me, I've never really had a problem with that. I mean, I think we got into the 70s and 80s when we had some of those, more stage things. This was that game in Four Nations. It was a little bit of a stage thing, but it was really competitive players and guys who are really good players that also have the ability to fight. So for me, that's kind of how I come down on it, is that, if it's in the battle and if it's in the competition, I think it's part of the sport.
I agree. And the fighting's come back a little bit. Florida brought it back, and Boston a little bit the last couple of years. So Minnesota's the team that fights. So it's coming back. It's not an epidemic. I'm not worried about it, but I'm happy to see a little more intensity, a little more passion, a little more fighting. No one ever leaves when a fight starts.
That's true. That is true. I mean, that night I was watching that game on TV. I was on vacation, and I just couldn't believe what I was watching. It was kind of a crazy
Yeah.
scenario there, and I can remember growing up and watching those Islander teams try to win Stanley Cups in the '80s and battling with the Bruins. It was, it's a memory for sure of those games. So that was certainly something for those of you, for young people who watch the Four Nations game. They won't soon forget kind of how that game started. I don't think. Before I let you go, because I know you got to catch a plane, I want to ask you just about, like, again, going back to the Leafs and in the division, Florida and Tampa. Like, people talk about, those of us in the business, we talk about it's part of the conversation. Well, they got to win the division. It'll make it an easier path. It's always hard no matter who you play. But do you think, in this division this year, in this particular situation for the Leafs, who are struggled to kind of have success and get on a run, do you think it's really something that would help them tremendously to try to win that division and let Florida and Tampa slug it out? They'd still have a hard matchup with someone, but to stay away from having to beat both of those teams to move on.
Yes, I think they'd much prefer to finish first, but I don't think Craig Berube will mention that to anyone on their team. They've got to be focused on how they're playing and not worry about who they play. If that becomes their focal point, we've got to avoid those Florida teams. They're screwed when they play them.
Yeah, no question about it. They got a couple games with the Florida Panthers coming up, so they'll be important games for them. I mean, it's a challenge. Last thing, do you think the Leafs have what it takes this year? I like their team better. I think this year I think Craig Berube has been he's set a nice tone for them going back to training camp. I think the team has more of a physical edge. I do think it will be hard to beat Tampa or Florida or both. But I like their chances a lot better this year. How do you feel?
I like their chances a lot better this year, too. Number one, the goaltending. They haven't had consistent goaltending like this from Dave for 10 years, where they've got two guys. I don't know who's going to start, but they've got two guys who played extremely well all year with a couple of minor glitches. But that's what happens sometimes. I like their D, especially adding Carlo. I like Tanev as an addition last fall. I think they're bigger, more physical, and I think Craig Berube is a top coach. That's a good formula.
Yeah, no question. I think you're right about that, and I think Craig has done a really nice job of kind of settling things out. When he goes into those media scrums right from the start of the year, he doesn't get into any kind of backery. He's just very matter of fact, very straightforward. I think that's a big help. It sets a nice tone.
Yeah, it's no BS. He's telling the truth. Yeah. He speaks plainly and simply. Short sentences. He's very to the point. I think it's a very effective strategy for managing the team.
All right. Well, Brian, listen, I know you got to catch a plane. You're off to Ottawa to see Ottawa and Minnesota in the PWHA tonight. So have a great flight. Thank you so much for the time. We really appreciate it. I'm sure I'll be talking to you. It's going to be a hell of a run to the Stanley Cup this year, but thanks again for the time, my friend.
Thanks, CJ.
All right. Brian Burke, and I will say it again, the one and only Brian Burke. You've been watching the Toronto.
And I checked. They're only awarding one cup. I checked again.
That's right. Exactly. There's only one every year. So we'll see who gets it this year. Brian, thanks so much for the time. You've been watching the Toronto Sports Rush, part of the Bet Rivers Network.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.